Well, dear 8-pound, 11-ounce baby Jesus, thank you for hearing our prayers. Little brother Bedlam might be back a little bit, but Bryan Nardo and Kasey Dunn are not, and that is good enough for at least a halfway hallelujah.
You are Locked On Oklahoma State, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma State Cowboys, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Howdy, y'all, and hello, all. Welcome back to Locked On Oklahoma State, your daily stop for all things cowboy and cowgirl related. My name is Cody Stovall. I want to thank you kindly for stopping by to make this your first listen. We're available on all of your podcasting platforms, visually as well on YouTube. Find me personally on X at All-Day State. Today, we're partially brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment matter more, especially right now when new customers can place a $5 bet and get started with $150 back in bonus bets. If your first $5 bet is a winner, make sure that you visit FanDuel.com to get started today. Meanwhile, we get started, and Christmas cometh early in Stillwater, America. Yeah, I could talk about how it may be a year late and $1 short, but we are finally here. And ironically enough, we might have a little bit of an OU pressure to think of that. We'll talk about that more in segment 2. But for now, we get to be excited collectively. The Kasey Dunn experiment is finally over. Now, of course, I personally had a very vested interest in hoping that Bryan Nardo obviously had a very successful time in Stillwater, America. Unfortunately, that did not work out. I did think that he was safe just because of the freshman class and the upcoming recruiting class being very invested in Bryan Nardo as well. So I assumed maybe he would at least get moved to a position. But since that did not happen, and both Dunn and Nardo are officially out of Stillwater, America, that kind of leads me to believe that we do know who the defensive coordinator likely is to be next, whether it's going to be the Georgia Tech fella or the Rice fella. I know Brian Smith seems to be a very popular individual at this very moment, as does this whole concept that Oklahoma State finally gets to move on. There has never been a time in Kasey Dunn's tenure that we've had a successful offense. A lot of us kind of gloss over the fact that even in 2021, our offense didn't even try to matriculate down the field. It was basically just give our punter enough room to boot the ball because the defense do the darn thing. And thankfully, the defense opened or embraced that with open arms, and they opened cans of whoopee quite often. And that kind of, covered up some of the deficiencies that a Kasey Dunn may have had. And then 2022, obviously, we know how that went, and there were shades of that this season. But from a wins-loss perspective, it got even further than just fracturing within the locker room. And again, people can have their different opinions and stances on Spencer Sanders. But I think everybody is collectively breathing a sigh of relief that Kasey Dunn is no longer there. And even though I do firmly believe that Bryan Nardo got kind of screwed to some degree by not being allowed to run the entirety of his system, nor was he being allowed to use all of the guys that he thought were the best implementation of that system, regardless, as a defensive coordinator, that is your title. So at the end of the day, even if you are being pushed into the corner, not allowed to do certain things, there are still some things you can do to try to remedy the situation. And clearly that did not happen. So maybe it was just a matter of being in a little bit over his head, or schematically, maybe he based everything off of Nick Martin and Colin Oliver and having the ability to have some of the guys in the back end be freed up by the guys up front, eating up double teams. But that also didn't exactly happen, so we had to scrap that. We had to go to a lot more 4-down set, which I think all of us can agree might be more suited for what we're trying to do. The original idea behind the 3-3-5, if you're somebody not named Acock over at Iowa State, is to slow down the spread concepts, right? The spread concepts have kind of reverted back to smash mouth, slug it out style of football, especially in the Big 12. So maybe going back to a 4-3 kind of system may work in our favor. There's going to be different iterations of the 4-2-5, 3-3-5 that can be sprinkled in as well. But having a base formation, obviously, is going to be something that's beneficial. Now, from a defensive line perspective, that might be the limiting factor here. Unless we plan to continue to hit the heavy portal and JUCO route when it comes to defensive linemen, I don't know that we can go to a traditional 4 lineman set at the moment, but that'll be something that we address as we find out who the new defensive coordinator is going to be. From an offensive perspective, guys, it would be nice to get Brennan Marion to come over from UNLV. Tulsa dude, has some connections, so there's going to be some viability in some of the recruiting department there. Of course, all of us, well, at least I, really, really would like Zach Robinson, but I do think that there's a potential that Zach Robinson would only make a move if it were to be for a head coaching role. And I don't see anything changing with Mike Gundy unless the next Board of Regents emergency meeting grows some crazy wild hairs. Now, of course, they're going to have the regularly scheduled Board of Regents meeting, but then there's also going to be an emergency meeting. I was told Friday, but evidently it might be next week. That one is going to be just about football and just about Mike Gundy. So that could change things, but seems fairly unlikely. What does seem likely is Mike Gundy is going to be willing or forced to restructure the deal. And when I say forced here, it's not throwing shade at Mike Gundy. It's instead throwing praise towards Chad Weiberg and Dr. Shrum, because there had to be enough pressure from those individuals to force Mike Gundy to do stuff, because we all know Mike Gundy doesn't typically fire people. He definitely doesn't typically fire people he feels like he can trust within the system, because it all runs much more easily, in Mike Gundy's opinion. And that obviously did not work. So the shakeup of the good old boys club is likely a good thing. And all of us can agree that this is the direction that Oklahoma State needed to go. Now, I think a lot of us might be a little perplexed by the timing, but I do think that the news of Jett Niu had a little bit to do with that, as far as waiting and giving guys a couple more weeks to find landing positions before making any announcements. Now, is Jason Mack going to kind of slide over into an offensive line role? I think that'll kind of be determined by who comes in as offense coordinator. I think the same will be said about Tim Rattay. Coach Wozniak is safe, right? Coach Dan Hammerschmidt seems to be safe, right? But outside of that, this is going to be contingent upon whom we decide to bring in, and if they're going to want to bring their own guys, their own quarterbacks coaches, their own quarterbacks. And then same thing defensively. Do they have somebody that they think can come in and be the next Nick Martin that can follow them from a previous system? This is going to be very interesting to see how it all shakes out. But, of course, this moment is about celebration. I'm not going to hoot and holler, rant and rave excitedly about the Bryan Nardo move, but the Kasey Dunn move makes sense. Now we don't have to make any more jokes about Dunn having, some kind of crazy video like a donkey show in Viva La Mexico on Mike Gundy anymore, because it don't matter. Kasey Dunn is going to take his talents elsewhere, as is Bryan Nardo. This will have some rippling effects, obviously, when it comes to the transfer portal, as well as the recruiting to some degree. Now, I think the timing of this is also somewhat indicative of at least waiting until National Signing Day was over to know more or less who you are going to have coming in and how you can sales pitch them on being part of the regalvanization to get Oklahoma State back to where it's supposed to be. The Restore Order crew has been very loud and boisterous, except for maybe a Landon Cleveland. He hasn't seemingly been putting out as many things as some of the other guys. That might be something that's worth watching as it pertains to Lyric Rawls. It is crazy how quick things can change, because I did talk to Lyric yesterday after the team meetings, and I said, hey, I'm hearing a bunch of upperclassmen are clearing out their lockers. It is a senior thing. Are you part of that? Please tell me that you didn't clean out your locker. And he said, no, I've got 2 more years left. So that wasn't me in the clearing the locker out stuff. And then I hear today, hey, you might want to check on Lyric. He's entering the portal evidently. And I messaged him and said, dude, what changed in the last 16, 17 hours? He said, well, they want me to play linebacker, and they're dead set on it. Playing safety is no longer an option. And he just got out of the rehab, the injury for this previous season. And part of that was slimming down so he could get faster to get out to the flats and up the seams a little bit more. So now all of a sudden, for us to completely flip the script a little bit and ask him to start going back to a transitionary phase where he's gaining weight and preparing for a different position, I do completely understand that Lyric Rawls wants to be here, but he doesn't think that we're going to change our mind about the switch to linebacker. Therefore, he's got to do what he's got to do. Now, maybe a new defense coordinator could shake things up a bit, right? You could get a DC that comes in that does come to Lyric and say, listen, I know they told you linebacker, or maybe I want to see you as your safety, or perhaps it could be a scenario like a Kendall Daniels that Lyric could benefit by having a new beginning, a new start. I have fears that with the Jett Niu situation, that kind of changes the landscape at least a little bit as the quarterback room is currently situated. Again, the offense coordinator is going to have a hand in some of that. Maybe he's got a quarterback that he's already identified that he wants to bring with, so on and so forth. So that'll be several things that are going to be interesting and worth the coverage throughout the course of the rest of the offseason. So this is going to be fun. At least we know today is fun. We can breathe that sigh of relief that these moves have been done. You cannot statistically be where you were, both offensively and defensively, and bring people back. Mike Gundy has done this previously, brought people back, even though the statistics did not make sense behind it. It is good to see the pressure being applied and us actually making some stuff happen. Everything in life is typically Bettor Together. Therefore, you've got to get squared away today with Bettor Together. If you don't really love the team that you drafted or put together for the fantasy season, or the season's been long and you haven't been able to kind of pinpoint all of the action for capitalization purposes, with Bettor Together, this is your opportunity now to kind of fix that. The first cooperative daily fantasy platform is here to save the day for you. This is where teamwork triumphs over talent, and you can win with or not against your friends. Just pick more or less on real-time player stats. You can then strategize with your partner. That'll help you boost your odds and climb the leaderboards together. So grab a friend and join the social daily fantasy movement at Bettor Together. This is going to provide you a sense of camaraderie that enhances the social and sports experience for the rest of the season. This is also what's going to allow you to realize that daily fantasy sports is so much more fun than just doing it alone. But like a lot of other things, it's going to be better when you have friends along for the ride. It is very easy to stay connected with friends when you can watch sports together in person, strategize, talk crap to each other, and try to figure out how you're going to make it work. Put the group chat to the test and prove who is the best at the end of the day. Get your buddy, get this thing together, download Bettor Together, and right now in your app store, you can sign up using the promo code Locked On for a chance to play in a contest against me. Because winning is fun alone, but it's so much more fun when you're doing it together. And my son's been big into the fantasy sports stuff this season. So maybe he could use a little break from that. And me and him will tag team on this thing and have some fun. Get your opportunity to have fun with a friend because it's Bettor Together. Download the Bettor Together app from your app store today. It's Bettor Together unless you're an OU fan. And yes, the talk of the morning before the news of Bryan Nardo and Kasey Dunn being let go as offensive and defensive coordinator was, of course, that longtime Cowboy commit Jett Niu flipped to go to OU. Now, before the financial side of this thing even came about, which basically OU is going to offer a little over $100,000 more than Oklahoma State for the services of Jett Niu, or whatever the case may be, whatever the exact number is. To me, before all that came out, it wasn't a major deal because we just recently kind of did our evaluation of Jett Niu and how it would kind of fit into the quarterback room with 4 quarterbacks that are somewhat similar. I thought obviously that was going to be beneficial. But at the same point in time, if you're talking about having more immediate playing time, it may be at OU. I mean, maybe not, right? We haven't really seen what we have behind everybody with Zane Flores having the injury this year and going through surgery, Garrett Rangel looking good against BYU, but then also having surgery. And then Weiberg Smith, he has looked good for the most part in a fairly small sample size. So we might have an idea, but it's not going to be pinpointed. Again, a lot of this could potentially change if a new offense coordinator wants to bring a quarterback with him, or he's already identified a quarterback in the portal that he was going to bring to his previous school, whatever that shakes out to be. As I said in the evaluation of Jett, I like Jett simply because Jett looks very reminiscent of Garrett Rangel's high school film. They're both around 6'3", 180 pounds, have similar builds, similar speeds, similar running styles. They have similar capabilities. And mechanically speaking, they do a lot of the same things. Now, I would say that Jett is a little bit more advanced, possibly, in maneuvering within the pocket, but Garrett is going to be more advanced at other things like potentially an RPO style of system. So each guy's going to have their pros and cons. But just like Garrett Rangel should not have been starting as a freshman at 182 pounds, Jett Niu is not going to be starting as a freshman at 182 pounds either. Garrett Rangel needed a couple years to not only understand the system, but more than anything, physically get himself to a position where he can take hits. Now, we're not talking about stiff-arming turf. That ain't going to work for anybody. I don't care how much weight room time you have. So, Garrett, don't do that anymore. OU fans are naturally going to be excited because they stole somebody from their big brother up the road. And, yes, we get to hold that title until they bring on another Bedlam. And perhaps it could happen sooner rather than later. But if you're one of those individuals that looked at Garrett Rangel's film coming out of Frisco in Texas and said he's going to start day one as a freshman, well, then you're going to be livid about the news of Jett Niu. If you're one of those individuals that said he looks really good, but it's going to take him a couple years to kind of get developmentally ready to just kind of handle the pressure of playing at this level. If you're in that camp, then this isn't a massive ordeal. The only thing that this changes, in my opinion, is the comfortability that we currently have with the quarterback situation. I think that we're fine with the quarterbacks that we have. And I also think that Garrett Wilson is not your run-of-the-mill typical walk-on as well, right? 6'2", 220-pound freshman from the state of Oklahoma, chose Oklahoma State after having several other suitors because he wanted to be part of this whole program. So we're not completely bare in the cupboard when it comes to talent at quarterback. I don't think talent at quarterback was the issue this season whatsoever. It was the fact that we had too many coaches that were playing too many games in regards to who should play and who should start and who shouldn't. It was rewarding of ridiculousness for most of the season. And that was very apparent on the field. Now, you could say some of last year was potentially a little bit of smoke and mirrors, but it's also just people didn't know how to stop Ollie Gordon and Alan Bowman. Once teams figured out that you can stop them the same way by going with the same defensive package that eliminates two dudes because of Alan Bowman's inability to stretch the field, it was kind of tailor-made for people to scheme against us pretty easily. Plus, not to mention, you had Kasey Dunn's 45 plays in the playbook that he's established and his whatever. It doesn't matter. We don't have to think about that anymore. We get to think about the new offense coordinator, whomever that may be. Maybe it's going to be Marcus Royal. Might be too much. Maybe it's going to be Zach Robinson, possibly, but he might want the head coaching title. So maybe it's going to be Marion at UNLV. He's done a lot of really good things with some local ties. And then same thing defensively, right? Is Brian Smith at Rice going to be the right candidate? Or could we go reel somebody in from Georgia Tech and bring them down to Stillwater America? And if we do that, what does that look like for some of the other guys, like Tim Duffy? Tim Duffy obviously has not been let go, but if Brian Nardo is no longer in control, then I guess that perhaps means that Joe Bob is going to stick around. I knew Joe Bob and Nardo were not going to stay together, but I didn't think it was going to be Nardo that was let go first. But nonetheless, it is what it is. We are where we are. And the Jett Niu situation, it just really depends on where you saw Garrett Rangel. And this also is going to be contingent upon what happens now. Because if we get Jett Niu, and then let's say we lose one of the three quarterbacks, and Weiberg Smith, Zane Flores, or Garrett Rangel, And then you're like, okay, because we have another guy that's, fairly similar to what we had in these other three. Plus, we also have Garrett Wilson. We're going to be okay. If you lose Garrett or you lose Zane or you lose Maluiake, then I think this whole thing changes. If that is the case, then you might have to go fishing in the portal, regardless of whether the new offense coordinator wants to bring somebody in or not. But there's also another layer to this. The offense coordinator that you do bring in, if they've already recruited these guys and they're already comfortable, that would go a long way as well, which is why somebody like a Marion does make some sense, especially being over at UNLV. You know good and daggone well. He recruited Maluiake Smith all day, every day. You know good and daggone well. He was scouting Zane Flores whenever Zane Flores was coming up. There's no way you cannot look at Mr. Nebraska that shattered all the high school records and not have some familiarity. Not to mention UNLV at one point in time was kind of, a team that was going to give you an offer to help potentially get you to bigger offers. So there's a lot of these guys that are going to have that familiarity, and he's going to have some familiarity already as well, geographically speaking. My heart's dead set on Zach. I would love Marcus, but I think there's going to be a lot of viable options, and they've got talent. They've got talent to work with. Now it just might be a little bit more important to convince all three of them somehow, some way to stay, even if that means no Tim Rattay. Tim Rattay right now likely stays, but there's not an overabundance of coordinators that like coming in without bringing their dudes with them, right? So there's going to be a lot of that, but there's going to be the occasional where you're going to have to deal with Wozniak, right? You're going to have to deal with Hammer. And when you have guys that have the long lineage of NFL pedigree at running back under Wozniak, it's not going to be a hard sell. The thing can be said with Coach Hammerschmidt. I'm a little intrigued to see what happens to Joe Bob since Nardo's out. Joe Bob might stay. I don't know. It'll be contingent upon the new coordinator, I'd imagine. From new coordinators to new dollar bills, you can have that. And you can have that today with FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL Cowboy action with America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 back in bonus bets if it's a winner. The FanDuel app is going to give you everything you need to dominate the space and the area of monetary domination. When you get that hunch in the middle of the game, you can now check out latest stats, view the live play-by-play, and so much more from the same page where you place your bets from. Make sure that you visit FanDuel.com to join today. You get in on the Tylan Wallace, Jalen Warren, Tyreek Hill action by going to FanDuel.com. Get started with that 150 bones back in bonus bets if your first $5 bet is a winner by going to FanDuel.com. Do not waste that tingling sensation in the middle of the game ever again. Make every moment matter more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Playing favorites, it can backfire. And that is what's currently happening in Stillwater, Oklahoma. Obviously, not a bad thing, but complacency has been the operative word we've been using for a couple months now. And the more information that comes out after all of this stuff, of course, Gundy wasn't at the meeting yesterday. Now we know why. It partially had something to do with National Signing Day. Obviously had something to do with getting rid of the two biggest coordinators at the university that you've let one person slide for a long time, and you really didn't let one person do their entire job. So I'm sure it was not easy. Not to mention you're going to have conversations with the McIndoes and the Dickies of the world as well, and Joe Bob, Duffy, however that shakes out, Paul Randolph. There's some playing favorites. And like Paul Randolph, he's a new coach. You wouldn't think he'd be in the playing favorites game, but if he has been, he needs to go too. Every single individual that has been coaching that played any form of favorites needs to skedaddle. I mean, that's another reason I'm not the biggest fan of Nardo, right? Because the favorites he was going to play was going to be what? Obi Ezigbo. But he made Obi a backup until we didn't have any options. So I don't think he's one of them. But is indefensible, inexcusable, intolerable. There's a lot of operative words we could use for what happened defensively this season. And at the end of the day, it is on Nardo. But, we would hoot and holler about seeing visually guys like Kendall Daniels and Cole Birmingham. And you're just like, well, that doesn't make sense. Why are they jogging? Why are they walking? Why are they quitting? Why are they not helping? Why are they just standing there? Why are they getting dominated? And it just happened over and over and over. And then you have to ask yourself, well, how is this getting rewarded? Like, these guys grade film with the players that are doing this stuff every single week. So how are they grading film and allowing it to continue the next week and then the next week and then the next week? It's because there's coaches that sometimes attach themselves to players. And they feel like if this guy can bust out of the seams, that's going to make me look like a smarter individual. It's going to make it look like this was the right pick. This was the right guy. And there's always going to be some back and forth between the coaching staff. Well, maybe we shouldn't get him. Maybe if we go with him instead. And, of course, at the end of the day, they all want to be right. There's not a coach out there that wants to be wrong. Now, you're going to be wrong sometimes, and that's okay too. But every opportunity you have to say, I recruited that guy, I brought him in. If he blows up, that's a feather in your cap. If most of the other staff thought that he was a questionable pickup and you stood behind it and you were right, things like that do go a long way. But that sometimes can create issues where you're too reliant on individuals. We got way too senior heavy. And a lot of these coaches thought because we've got the second oldest team in all of college football, this should kind of run itself. And it should have. If there wasn't complacency. If people were not being rewarded for being late or being lazy or slacking or being a bad example. Those individuals were getting rewarded. Or if they got NIL money to the point that they had to play. And that's the biggest frustration with some of the transfer portal stuff is, of course, some people are just going to naturally be unhappy. Some people are going to feel like they didn't really get managed right. But some people out and out watched them grade higher than the starters and know that they weren't going to do anything with it. So as the season progresses, if you're a redshirt sophomore or you're a junior, right, and you've got all these seniors ahead of you, and you're like, okay, I get it. But if I keep busting my hump and I keep doing what I'm doing, those numbers every week during practice are eventually going to get me on that field. That did not happen this year. And when we did see the young guys get out on the field, they were typically better than the starters, and it wasn't really a big, crazy ordeal. It was a noticeable difference. So the youth that are in this restoration mode, that's huge for Oklahoma State. But we cannot afford to keep any coaches, like any of them, that were responsible for the playing favorites game. Now, Gundy, he is responsible as well, but he ain't going anywhere. Unless something crazy happens at the Board of Regents meeting, this is what it is. But the benefit here now we know is with these moves, new coordinators, and I put this out this morning. I don't like hearing the news of Nardo. I was hoping it was wrong. But, it is what it is. And when you're 133rd, 132nd, whatever, offensively and defensively, you got to do something. And there's likely no way Nardo was going to get the benefit of the doubt at the end of the day if it had to get to throwing people under the bus. So shout out again, Chad Weiberg, for channeling your inner Ricky Bobby and saying, no, sir, Mike Gundy, you do not wear the pants anymore. I do. Well, okay, maybe Dr. Kasey Shrum does, but I wear them as it pertains to athletics. I'm your boss. You have to make the moves that you refused to do last year. My frustration is always going to be because of last year and in the offseason, Mike Gundy literally only firing one coach, and that was only because that one coach, he said some things possibly a little bit too loudly. He said, F everybody else. I'm the smartest man in the room. I'm not going to fire Dunn. I'm not going to fire Dickey. I'm not going to fire McIndoe. I'm not going to fire Rattay. It is what it is. We are where we are. At least we're here. And at least the players can now know that you should stay. Not all of you. I get some of you, it makes sense. But most of you in the 23, 24 class, 22 class, this is going to be your restoration project. Right? And that's what I'm gathering from a lot of the young guys is they legitimately want to be the team that fixes the shit. And that's what this season was. 2 of the last 3 seasons have been pure poop. And there are going to be a lot of young guys that want to be a part of the rebuild. And then you've got to sprinkle in enough veterans to kind of piece everything together. Not too many. I understand if we're going to do some pushing, it's going to be more towards the upperclassmen. And that's okay, because if you're going to rebuild, you might as well clean it all out for the most part anyways. I'm sad to see Lyric go. I'll be sad to see some of the other guys go. I might not be sad to see, somebody like KD go. He killed me this year. But there was coaches that rode on the coattails that Dagnabbit Kendall Daniels is going to figure it out. One of these days, one of these weeks, or he's just going to give a crap again. One of these days, one of these weeks. And that's why most everybody is now in a position of job searching. I really don't think that Gundy's going to be allowed to keep meddling in things the way he has previously. I'm also hearing that he's going to have to take at least a little bit of a step back and allow the new coordinators to do their thing, install their schemes and their systems. This idea of only bringing in coaches that will run what Mike Gundy wants them to run, it worked. It did for quite some time. And it was good in theory. But the landscape of college football has shifted. It's not gonna fly anymore. You got to shake it up. You got to mix it up. That's what all of this is. And now he's going to have to take a step back. He's going to have to do the true CEO role. The problem with Mike Gundy doing the CEO roles, he wanted the CEO role, in my opinion, but then he also wanted to be like, well, don't start that guy. Why would you play him? Why would you pick that play call in this style of situation? I don't want to run that system. I want to go to this. I want, you know what I mean? That style of thing. Head coach should have some overarching say, but not to the point that you micromanage everything so much that you irritate the people that are good enough to just do it. Sink or swim. You got to take off the floaties, Mike Gundy. No more floaties. You got to bring these dudes in that are legitimate heavy hitter guys, whether it's, a Brian Smith or a Marcus Arroyo or Zach Robinson or Marion, whatever. You've got to let these guys come in and do their thing. You be the ambassador. You help with the marketability. Say some of the crazy stuff in the media to get people talking. That's cool. That's great. Take your shirt off. Put your singlet on. That's cool. That's great. But you don't get to pick quarterbacks no more. You don't get to pick whether we're going to run 4-3 or a 3-4 or 4-2-5 or a 1-1-1-1-1-1-1-1. You run the show and let them run the team. I think he tried that, but Kasey Dunn just wasn't going to be the guy. And Mike Gundy refused to acknowledge that Kasey Dunn was just never going to be that guy. Well, now he gets to bring those guys in and let it be what it is, even if it's a 2-3 year style of deal. Or you never know. The next emergency Board of Regents meeting, not the normal meeting, but the emergency one, maybe that could get wild. And Mike Gundy could say, you know what? I'm going to take my ball and go home too. Doubtful. But hats off to Chad Weiberg and Dr. Kasey Shrum for allowing this to happen. Oh, and as the timeline goes, I don't think we were going to announce this stuff today. I think we were going to give everybody a couple weeks to kind of find more landing spots. I think Jett Niu flipping to OU and it being talked about, well, duh, of course he's going to flip. Oklahoma State doesn't know what they're going to do or who's going to be coaching or who's going to be fired. I think all of the uncertainty surrounding the conversation around Jett Niu flipping from O State to OU was part of this deal. And again, you are seeing, OU and Utah and UCF and several teams around us that are hiring and firing and having interviews and being fairly public about it and trying to nail things down. And we have tried to do everything in the dark. So this was pressure from Weiberg, pressure from Dr. Shrum, pressure from Jett Niu. So in a crazy way, thanks, little baby Bedlam brother OU, for pushing the envelope. This is a necessity. The players that understood the issues this year are going to be excited. The players that have already decided that, that they need to go elsewhere, this decision is not going to affect them a whole lot. And National Signing Day is done. So there's that. I'm sure we're going to have a lot more to talk about. So stay tuned. Do me a favor. Hit the like button if you like the daggone thing. Dislike it if you don't. That's okay, too. More importantly, I love you. God bless. Go Pokes. My podcasting people out there. You're the bricks, the bread, the butter, the fountain, the fondue, funny stuff, funky stuff. You're all of it. You know the drill. Hit the stars, leave a review, do what you do. We're going to get out of here. Later, my taters.